Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining another Hurlingham talk. And tonight I'd like you to welcome the lovely Pepita Stonor. Good evening, Pepita, and welcome to our Hurlingham talks. It's so lovely to have you here. Pepita and I met in 2005 when Pep joined the Daisy Trust Committee, and we worked together on many events which many of you have attended and supported for many years. And thank you all for your support. It meant so much to the Daisy Trust and still does. But Pep, I just wanted to ask you, where does the name Pepita come from?
Good evening, Janie. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. Yes, you've probably never asked me that. And well, Pepita comes from, I was born in Mexico, actually. My parents are Australian and were posted there with the Australian Embassy in 1971. And so I actually had dual nationality till I was 18.
Wow.
But when I was born, my mother happened to be reading a book by Victoria Sackville-West, and the main character, the ballerina, was called Pepita. So that was the inspiration for the name, really.
So you're a ballerina. So you were born in Mexico, and how long did you live there for?
We had 3 wonderful years there, and my parents really loved the posting. It was, fantastic history and music and dance and arts and crafts. And Mexico is a, fascinating city, 7,300 feet above sea level. So, actually they got there just after the 1968 Olympics, which actually, at the time was quite interesting because never before had they had Olympics at that altitude. So it actually changed the way athletes prepared for things, because they were worried about it, and it did change the results. So the athletes coming from places like Kenya did much better because they trained at altitude, and so the IOC had to have a lot of discussions about it. But I always say, because I was born at that, I have a very, very low heart rate, which has given a lot of people a few questions. I'm obviously not an Olympic athlete, but I think it does help. So Mexico was very interesting, and my parents loved it there. My father actually climbed Mount Popo, which is nearly 17,000 foot live volcano, which actually erupted in 2020. So he climbed that. Swiss
Not he was on it, I hope.
No, but he was absolutely shattered from that experience. So so we were there 3 years, and then we were posted back to Canberra. And
So I was going to say, which other countries have you lived in? So you went to Canberra.
So we went to Canberra first, and that was obviously because Australian Foreign Affairs was based in Canberra. And for those of you that have never been there, it's obviously it's the capital city of Australia, but it was a purpose-built city by an architect called Walter Burley Griffin. And it was purpose-built because they couldn't decide on whether to have Melbourne or Sydney, so they just plonked the city in the middle and built it. And so it was a very, it was full of civil servants and diplomats. It was, but I hear that it's come of age now. It's a bustling city. But yes, we were in Canberra. And then
my granddaughter's just gone to university there, by the way. So that's interesting.
Yes,
I hope it's nice for her anyway.
Yes, no, I'm sure she'll have a lovely time there. It's a beautiful city. So we were there for 3 years. My brother was born there, so he got the name Robert. My parents gave him a very dull name after mine. And then we were posted in 1978 to Burma, what's now obviously Myanmar. And that was considered a hardship posting in those days.
But before that, do you not have any lovely stories about living in Canberra or anywhere before? Or
not Canberra, no. But I can definitely tell you some stories from after Canberra.
Okay, all right. So you went.
So
you went on to Burma. Carry on.
We went to Burma in 1978, and that must have been quite difficult for my parents with a 6-week-old baby. It was a tough 1978. It was full of malaria and dengue fever, but it was Burma was the land of the pagodas, and Rangoon was known as the Paris of the East. And we lived in a compound with next door to the British diplomats and American diplomats, and all the houses had tennis courts. And so I think the family's love of tennis really came from that, because we had lots of round robin tournaments, and it was a great time, as well as lots of formal dinners too. So yeah, so Burma was an interesting posting.
Oh, well, that must have been fantastic. And
Yeah.
where did you go? Where did you go from Burma?
Well, Burma, actually, sorry, I've remembered a few other things from Burma because it was an
Oh,
interesting.
great. Yeah. We want to hear all the gossip, all the stories.
Well, it's sort of hand-me-down gossip, but you know, my parents, we grew up in this sort of beautiful colonial home, but of course we the staff were all Buddhist, so you know, whenever there was a scorpion or a snake in the house, my mother always had great difficulty convincing them because they would never kill anything.
Oh my goodness.
And our chef had been trained by the British Embassy, so when we turned up, he was insisting on cooking full roast beef with Yorkshire puddings and bread sauce in the tropical heat. And my mother had to gently say, could you cook some local cuisine? So that was fun. And then we had a gardener that was always nicknamed the philosopher, because he said to my father one day, there are lots of black cars pulling up on the boundary to visit the staff quarters because there's one of the maid's daughters is visiting. And when my father asked, you know, have these black cars left the boundary of the property? The gardener said, oh, sir, where there's a honey pot, the bees will still come. And so he was nicknamed the philosopher after that, the gardener. So yes, it was a wonderful one. It's sad to see how Burma is now, because it was a wonderful, wonderful posting. And my parents were there when Lord Louis Mountbatten was assassinated too. And they said that the queues went for miles and miles because he was so well respected by the Burmese. And I asked my mother why that was, and she said, well, because he had insisted that all the troops removed their shoes when they entered any of the pagodas. So the Burmese people always held him in very high regard. So they remember the queues to sign his condolence book in Burma. So yes, that's probably. I attended Rangoon International School, and I think I've got very fond memories. Those are probably my first memories, really, of diplomatic childhood.
All right. So where did you go from Burma?
So Burma, we were posted back to Canberra, which again, there aren't enormously exciting stories about time in Canberra, but yes, we were then posted to Singapore. So that was
where did you go to school in Singapore?
Singapore, I went to Tanglin and then followed by United World College. So we were in Singapore 1983. Again, we're fortunate to live in a beautiful colonial black and white home in White House Park next door to the Australian ambassador's resident, Glen Caird. Sadly, the properties have all been sold, but they were absolutely beautiful black and white properties. And we inherited a dog with the house called Nana from Peter Pan and Wendy. She was a rescue dog, but she was terrified of tropical thunderstorms. So whenever there was a tropical thunderstorm, she'd squeeze through the tiny grate in the veranda, and we'd find her upstairs under the bed. So, you know, this poor dog wasn't good with the
my daughter's got a dog like that in Australia. It always hides under the bed if there's any sign of a storm. And we also lived in Singapore for 6 months, and we inherited a cat. So we also got together.
Exactly.
But Singapore was also interesting for your family because your grandfather had been there in the war.
Yes, both Burma and Singapore were very interesting from a family point of view. My father had been posted with the Australian Army, 1 RAR to Malaysia, but more than that, my grandfather in 1940 enlisted, aged 19, and was sent to Malaya to fight the Japanese. They kept getting pushed back to Singapore. And so we grew up really with his stories about, and he was always telling them with a sense of humor, but he was a bit of a scallywag, I think. And he'd tell us, you know, that when the Japanese captured Singapore, he and a couple of friends went down to the wharf to try and steal a boat to sail to Australia. I'm never quite sure, but the plan didn't work anyway, because he was captured and then put into Changi. And in Changi, they formed working parties. They built the aerodrome. And they quite often stole out of Changi at night to trade with the Chinese. So he sold his engagement watch for 100 eggs, and they had quite a bustling trade. You know, he was always quite funny about. He learned, you know, his maths was amazing because he was always counting all the eggs and everything. So, but yes, they were quite brave. And then things became quite difficult in Changi. I think sort of around 1943, when the food was very, very scarce, and the Japanese said to the prisoners, who would like to come to Thailand? There's going to be food aplenty. It's the land of milk and honey. And so my grandfather volunteered and was on the F Force, which is now infamous F Force that built the Burma-Thailand Railway. So it was, yes, they had a terrible train trip from Singapore to Bampong, and men were cramped into metal carriages like cattle.
Imagine.
My grandfather did write his story that is now in the Australian National Library, and it really was really for the family, but it is a harrowing account of really what happened on that Burma-Thailand Railway. They were very, in terrible conditions, monsoon and jungle, and he used to tell us the Japanese used to say speedo, speedo, and they were really very, very poorly. And I think, one of the chapters in his book, he actually writes he lay down in the jungle to die. He was so sick. He was he was a 6'4" man, big strong man, but he was 34 kilos, and for some reason the Japanese then shipped him back to the hospital in Changi. He said he was terrified because, of course, when they'd been building this bridge at Three Pagodas Pass, the Aussies had tried to sabotage the building, thinking the Japanese would be on the trains and sabotage the bridges and things. But so when he was on the train going back to Changi, he was terrified that this railway they had built badly was going to. And he said every time the train came off, the Japanese made all the sick prisoners put the train back on the tracks. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so he got back to Changi and he was in hospital for 4 months, I think, weighing 34 kilos. And then a rather sort of nice ending in a way is Captain McGregor took him under his wings. He was running a duck farm at Changi and supplying duck eggs to all the very sick soldiers. And actually there's just been an article in Australian National Geographic about this Captain McGregor and mentions my grandfather. They hundreds of thousands, eggs that saved these soldiers. And so he then caught the flying boat home at the end of the war and landed in Sydney to Rose Bay, where my grandmother was waiting for him after 4 years not knowing whether he was alive or dead. So that was a nice ending to the story. Yeah. Oh.
I bet he can't look at another duck egg.
Well, he could never eat rice. He spent his 21st birthday in Changi eating boiled rice, and he could never eat rice. So I think, yes, it was a harrowing time, but he was a lovely man, and he told these stories to us as children with a very warm and sort of humorous way, which was obviously a terrible situation, but probably only getting it now.
Very brave man.
The thought, I have a nearly 19-year-old son, and the thought of him enlisting and going to fight for our country is simply terrifying.
Awful. You can't be that old. You look about 20. Anyway, where was your father posted next?
So after Singapore, he was posted directly to the Solomon Islands as High Commissioner, and the Solomon Islands was quite the shock after sophisticated Singapore. So the High Commissioner's residence was in Honiara on Guadalcanal, the main island, and some people might be familiar with Guadalcanal because, of course, it was again a scene of quite famous World War II battles, fierce battles, because the Japanese occupied it, and the Allies only really managed to get it back sort of in 1943, but there was some fierce battles. So I think there've been a few films made about these in Guadalcanal. So, and quite often my parents would find live ammunition, and you always had to be careful to stick to the roads because things would blow up. It was really quite basic still in 1985. And the front of the sea in front of Honiara was full of World War II wrecks, and it was it's a diving mecca. People go from all over the world to dive there because you can sit in a Spitfire that's underwater. I mean, personally, I never liked swimming there because it's a volcanic island and the sand is black and the sea just looked dark, and I just had a lot of images of sharks.
Terrifying.
Terrifying, horrible. And yes, so Solomon Islands was very different to Singapore, but interesting. And interesting. So we
did you go to school there?
No, there was no high school, so I was sent back to boarding school in Canberra, age 12, and I used to come up 3 times a year, fly on my own from Canberra up to Honiara, and have a tropical holiday 3 times a year. So I thought it was rather idyllic.
Yeah,
I'm not sure my parents- yes.
very lucky. Very lucky.
Yeah.
Were there any
Yeah.
funny stories when you were there?
In the Solomons? Well, I was quite fortunate. I sort of went on quite a few trips with my father to some of the outer islands, and I suppose at the time I didn't appreciate it, but you know, one trip we went to see a very an elder from a village that was well respected, and we, you know, as my father as High Commissioner, had to pay his respects. So we went in a canoe to reach this island, and we, as you know, I was quite hungry because we'd been on a few days sort of this trip in outer. It was really tropical island, and we sat down in this village while the whole village watched us. They had prepared a feast, you know, but it was sweet potatoes, and then they delivered this beautiful white looking meat, which I thought, oh, lovely chicken, and I tasted it, and I would never forget the taste. It was absolutely horrible. I think it was turtle, and I really looked like I was enjoying it, and I remember thinking, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever tasted, and I've got to smile and look like it's delicious.
I think I've had turtle soup once, but I don't think it tasted that bad. But perhaps it wasn't. It probably was. It's probably chicken. When did you leave? When did you leave Solomon Islands?
So we left Solomon Islands in 1988, and we came. My father was posted to be head of the International Affairs Division at the Commonwealth Secretariat in Pall Mall, Marlborough House.
Oh,
and
lovely.
so he was really on secondment from the Australian Foreign Service to the Commonwealth. And in this role, his job was really to organise the CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings. And every 2 years, they would present works for the heads of government to agree. And so that was his main role, and some very interesting times, you know, because when he first came to the role, there were probably 16 or 17 dictatorships. And as their main remit was promoting democracy and observing democratic functions, by the time he left in 1996, there were only four dictatorships left. That wasn't to do with my father. That was, you know, sort of fall of the Berlin Wall and opening up. And so, and he also did the South African elections in 1994. And that was, sadly, I was at university and oblivious to this momentous occasion. Otherwise, I probably should have visited, but he said the observer groups were worried that the election wouldn't go well and they wouldn't know how to vote. But in actual fact, they turned out in droves to vote through the townships and everywhere. And the spoil rate was only 1%, which was incredible for a first election. So they were thrilled with that. And of course, he's fortunate to have met Mandela. And so my daughter was quite chuffed the other day when he showed her a photo with him with Mandela, which was quite nice.
He was a lovely man, wasn't he?
Yeah, so that was, yeah.
So was that when you
London?
So was that when you became a member of Hurlingham?
Yes. So my mother, well, we were diplomatic members to start with, but we had moved countries every 3 years. So what is somewhat bizarre is that my mother actually must have thought we're going to stay here longer. And so she put us on the main list. And in those days, it wasn't as long. So we had a small time as a off-peak, and then we became full members. So thank goodness Mum did that.
Yeah.
At the time. Yes.
So, but this stage you graduated and were starting work in London at Estee Lauder's head office in London?
Yes. So what I had actually done is I had worked for Estee Lauder throughout my university studies on the shop floor for all the different department stores, which actually gave me the most amazing grounding in sales and marketing. I learned everything you ever need to know working in Harvey Nichols, Harrods, Selfridges, and I actually loved it. And so my first job was in the head office. And yes, I really loved it. I had all my university friends around me in Berkeley Square in different advertising and different roles, and we had a really great time. It was
a lovely area.
Yeah,
lovely area to be. And you must have some lovely stories about those days.
Well, yes, luxury cosmetics in those days were really still distributed very selectively. So you actually were not allowed to sell anywhere other than in high-end department stores. And so it was a very luxury environment. It felt wonderful. But in 1999, one of the brands broke that agreement and started selling perfumes to Superdrug. And of course, that was the beginning of the end of a selective distribution. But at the time, yes, we had lots of famous people come in and purchase their cosmetics from us. And so it was great fun. yes, so I then went to the head office.
Yeah.
And met lots of people. You know, Estee Lauder was still alive then, and she'd stopped traveling, although she was quite dangerous when she visited, because she'd go into stores, and there was a famous story of her in Harrods sitting on a stool and just handing out her gold £50 compacts to every customer that walked in, and Harrods weren't very happy about that. But
I bet they weren't.
yes, but yes,
And then,
Leonard
is it,
Lauder.
yeah, so this is you then left Estee Lauder, and your boss took you with him. You must have been very popular and very good, I think, that he took you. Or was it a she?
It was a she, actually.
Oh,
Jane.
she.
Yeah,
Sorry.
she was headhunted to be managing director of Calvin Klein, and so in 1996, Calvin Klein was really at the top of the game. We'd just launched, you know, the biggest fragrance launch of all time, which was CK1, and it was very revolutionary in that at that time. That was environmentally friendly packaging and recyclable, and it was a really cool, fun product. And so we then, yes, we had a great time. Not many people knew that it was owned by Unilever, so we had all the benefits of Unilever. You know, really, you know, they paid us well. We had great pension. Everything was great, but they left us alone because, you know, we were a small cosmetics company, but for them, compared to frozen peas, we weren't really that important. But, you know, we had a great time running and traveling all over the world. I ended up being European marketing director for them. And by that point, they had bought quite a lot of brands, you know, quite well-known brands: Karl Lagerfeld, Vera Wang, Cerruti, Chloe. So it was a great time to be in that world.
And I think you have a couple of stories about the perfume world. You must have smelled delicious, by the way.
I did. I have to say, I now have to purchase my own fragrance, and it's quite. I had free stuff for years, but yes, our job was really to go to the Calvin Klein head office, which was in New York. It was in Trump Tower. I didn't realize at the time that, you know, years later he'd become president. But yeah, so we'd go there, and the Americans would, you know, they would have developed the fragrance, and they would present it to us to say we have to then go and sell it into Europe. But we had some clashes of culture, you know, things like they developed a beautiful fragrance called Truth, but of course no one in Europe could say TH, so that was a flop because, you know, Spanish and French wasn't great. So and the bottle was too tall for European shelves, so that didn't fit. So we had some fun with that. We had Max Azaria BCBG, which was a beautiful brand. That's launch date was September 11. So unfortunately that brand never survived because it was September 11, 2001. And then we had a teenage brand for boys, and just before launch I got my 18-year-old brother into the head office to test the product, and in the boardroom, I'll never forget, he couldn't work out where the spray button was, and I was so embarrassed with all my colleagues that teenager couldn't find it. But it ended up being a major product default, that all teenage boys couldn't find the spray button, and that fragrance didn't do well either. So I've had to apologize to my brother ever since that.
I must say I did some launches, and I had a failure with a men's brand as well. It must be quite difficult, I think. So you left Unilever Cosmetics in 2004, and after 8 years, why was that?
Well, actually, we had moved to Fulham by then because I was pregnant with my first child and I was on maternity leave. I was quite happy, actually. We were living in Rivermead Court, and I was coming in every day to the Hurlingham with my baby to feed the ducks and go to the playground and have a lovely time. And sort of starting to think, oh gosh, how am I going to leave this to go back to this job that was flying around the world? And really, I was starting to realize it was going to become difficult. But luckily, the head office decided to move to Geneva. So the decision was taken from me, and I was very fortunate to get a year's maternity and a year's redundancy. So I really was very, very lucky. I was paid for 2 years to enjoy my child. So I was very fortunate. And
great.
Yeah, so,
and I think this is when we come to the Daisy Trust.
Yeah.
Around this time, I think. Did you get involved with the Daisy Trust then?
That's right. In 2005, I then had a toddler and another one on the way, and work was not really an option with 2 young ones. But you know, having grown up in a family where service was quite important, I really wanted to do something for the local community, and I think my mother also understood that I would need something, you know, also to keep me busy. And so she introduced me to Jane Erdley, which a lot of people on the call tonight will remember Jane. And she was my mother's tennis partner at Hurlingham at the time. And so Jane took me to my first Daisy Trust meeting at Louise Steidel's house. And that's when I met you, Janie. That was in 2005. And I was really amazed at the work that these, group of 12 women were doing around a kitchen table to help those less fortunate in the borough. So, yeah.
I remember that very well. And we worked together on many events for the Daisy Trust. I remember you managed to get Natasha Kaplinsky to open the fair once. How did you manage that?
Well, that was, she was living in Fulham by then. She was a neighbour, and her husband also knew my husband quite well. So I did take a little bit of woozing and smoozing, but she was thrilled to do it, and she stayed a friend for many years until she moved to the countryside. Yes, so
it certainly made a lot of difference to the event, I must say. And what were your favourite Daisy Trust events, do you think?
Well, we've held many over the years. There's been all sorts of things at Lady Margaret's. We've held family carol services at St. Denis and All Saints. We've had an Easter egg hunt in Councillor Stainton's garden. And Frances, I know, is on here tonight. She might remember that the squirrels decide to eat the eggs. So we didn't do that event again, despite her generosity. And of course we had a ball for the first time ever in 2019, which was phenomenal, hosted by Sophie Rayworth, and that raised over £60,000 on the night alone, which was incredible. It was a masked ball, which actually I'm chuckling to myself now, because we would never have known now that masks would be de rigueur, but they were not the type of masks we wear now. They were Venetian, they were beautiful. But my favourite event really has to be the Daisy Trust Fair. And, you know, really the Hurlingham Club have been a phenomenal support for that, because, you know, to hold that fair year after year in beautiful surroundings, it really, we are very grateful.
Yes, I think I was involved in setting that up. I remember that was the first thing as I got involved in. But anyway, Hurlingham, we are very grateful to you, and it's really made the Daisy Trust having such a lovely event. And thank you everyone who comes to it as well. Through the change in leadership, you actually became chair in 2009, bringing new people onto the committee. I know many people here are familiar with the Daisy Trust, but there are people who are not. Could you update us on what the Daisy Trust actually does? And is it the same as it was?
A good question, Janie. Yes, the Daisy Trust was set up in 1981 in Daisy Lane, just behind the back gate of the club, by Caroline and Patrick Ground and friends. And really their remit was not that different to what it is now. It was, how can we make money to give to those less fortunate in the borough? I have to say the early committee was probably more capable than us, because I think they made their wares and sold them in the Hurlingham Play Hut. I'm sorry to say that this committee doesn't make things anymore, but
not me either.
And so it is really still a charity with very few costs, because no overhead, because every meeting is run around kitchen tables of friends' homes. And you know, I remember Caroline Ground saying to me, it's really doing what you can when you can, and having fun doing it as well. And I feel very lucky for the time I spent on the Daisy as committee and chair, because really I worked with some wonderful, wonderful friends and women who really had all held very high-powered, great jobs, but because they had decided to look after their children, were sort of, I don't want to say they were idle, but they were looking for something to do, and so they were enlisted by me. And they always used to joke, if Pep asks you for a coffee, don't go, she'll enlist you to do something. So yes, so the ethos of the Daisy Trust has not changed. It's run by volunteers to fundraise with as fewer costs as possible, and then give it back to the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham.
Yep, that's right. What was your vision for the Daisy Trust when you became chairman?
Well, we had started to see a lot more applications in 2009. The council had cut back on funding, and there were many more applications. And each committee meeting we would discuss for quite a long time. And I could see that, a lot of these applications were coming in, and some we couldn't give to because they didn't fit our criteria. For not giving ongoing costs and not paying salaries, and we have a certain grant policy. So I actually asked a dear friend of mine Claire, if her father, Sir Christopher Sumner, would help me put together a grant application form and grant policy, so that we could standardize applications and help charities to make the processes as lean and as easy for them as possible. And so I worked with Sir Christopher over you know, quite a few weeks, and he was wonderful. He really helped me put the grant policy that's still in place today.
Such a lovely man.
Yes, so that
My favorite man. Lovely.
yeah, and it's all standardized. So that was great. That was right at the beginning. We put that in place.
And you also moved the Daisy Trust into the digital age, screaming and kicking, as I remember. How did you do it?
Well, perhaps because I'd come from a marketing background, I could see the way things were going. The Daisy Trust did have a holding webpage, but I also knew that we could save a lot of postage costs and a lot of things if we could bring it on to the digital forum. And thank goodness we did, because now the grant application form is on there and everything to do with the fair is online. Storeholders can apply online, and everything is done through the website. Quite a lot of information is on there before the fair, and this year was an example of exactly why being digital was so important. We managed to, and it's quite incredible to think that 2 months before the fair date, we still thought we were doing it in person, and we had to pull it entirely online. And so this year the committee incredibly managed to get all those storeholders online so people could purchase and support the Daisy from their home, because we were in lockdown by then. So we managed to run the fair digitally this year. I'm really hoping that
I don't know how you did it.
No, well, I wasn't involved, but the committee were amazing at doing that. So yes, so I'm really hoping in 2021 we will be back in person, because we really missed that.
Yeah, we all miss it as well. So in 2014, you moved from London, where you'd lived since graduating from university in 1994.
That's right. We decided, sadly, to leave Fulham. We had had wonderful years there, but we had 2 boys at prep school in Buckinghamshire and a little girl, and we decided that we would take a chance and move a little bit further out. We're not too far. We're near Taplow. It's not too far, and yeah, just more space. And we've been very happy. We still come up to Hurlingham to play tennis and paddle, my new favourite sport, and we still come up to Hurlingham. Don't worry. And I actually probably appreciate it more now I'm up there. You know, it's a wonderful place to visit.
And although you remained a trustee of the Daisy Trust, you handed over the reins in 2016 to a new chairman.
That's right. I handed over to a friend, Jackie Lee, and she's got 3, she lives in Fulham, she's got 3 young boys, and she has done the most incredible job on it. She's run the fair, and really it's gone from strength to strength. It's important with these things to keep them fresh. I was also living in the country, so it wasn't she's done the most amazing job on it. So I'm very grateful to a lot of loyal friends who have stayed on the committee too, for the continuity.
Yeah, she's done a very good job, I think. And since you moved out, you've become a tech entrepreneur. How on earth did that come about?
Well, I think if you'd said that to me a few years ago, I don't think I would have believed you. I may have laughed as well. But yes, well, having given up the Daisy, I thought I'd better do something. So in 2017, I went back to university to study a master's in applied positive psychology. This really came from an interest in children's well-being and resilience, because I had 3 children obviously going through the school system, and I became increasingly aware of sort of different problems that were occurring in the school system. So I went back, and in 2019 I was undertaking some research on secondary school well-being programs, and my university advertised a Research England program to be held at Imperial College. It was actually called a hackathon. And this was for a weekend. You went to the hackathon for a chance to get £60,000 worth of funding and a 6-month tech startup program with Imperial. So I went, because the theme was mental health, well-being and happiness, which was completely up my street. And so, yes, I chanced it in a cold February in 2019. And
you got it, did you? Did you get the funding?
Yes, I mean, I must admit, Janie, it was slightly terrifying, because I walked in on a Saturday to a London tech hub in White City, full of bright young PhDs at the forefront of London's medtech scene. And we were all asked to write on a piece of paper 3 hashtags, which were to go on and form our groups to pitch for funding the next day. And everyone else was writing blockchain, machine learning, AI, and I wrote children prevention education. And so, but somehow something must have resonated, because the next day we pitched and we secured the funding, and it was an amazing 6-month experience. But it was really, we were really a research program ourselves. So Research England were looking at how you could take academic research and transfer it into commercial products. So we were one part of 4 cohorts. So it was a really amazing journey. And now fast forward 18 months later, I've got a tech startup, an app for children that's in beta trial at the moment. So,
so you spent, is this when you were doing your 6 months at the Imperial College?
Yes, we did 6 months where they coached us how to set up a tech product. And really at the end, when we launched it at Imperial, we just had what's called a prototype, which is really like a drawing on a piece of paper, what we think it would look like. But at the time when we presented it, a pediatrician approached me and said this would be wonderful for children in hospitals to prevent anxiety and worry occurring. So we actually have been working with some London children's hospitals. It's been slightly delayed with COVID, but in a funny way, I think that might have helped us, because it's given us time to also look at the education sector. So we're doing all of that now.
Okay, so what actually is it? What is this you've just developed?
If there's time at the end, we might be able to show a little 2-minute video of the beta version, but it's a augmented reality, so that's in 3D. App. It's a character, a chameleon, so it's for children aged 7 to 12, and it's to deliver them evidence-based positive psychology exercises that they engage in, just to really, it's about relieving their anxiety about going to hospital. So the hospital elements will be built into, because at the moment, if your child needs to go for day surgery or a procedure, they really don't get any information. A lot of the information is still sent by post, sometimes a phone call. The websites have information, but you're relying on the parents to impart that to the child. So this is really, how can you get the information to children on digital? Because these children have grown up with this, and that's really the future.
Okay. And so what's next for Coggy?
What's next for Coggy? Well, we're in researching it at the moment. And so I'm quite excited, because we will undertake the research, and then, yes, the world's the oyster then, Janie, because really, what the real premise for this was that when I went to the Imperial College Hackathon, I knew the cost of mental illness in England alone is 105 billion. I knew that 50% of children before the age of 14 have had some form of mental health problem, and that 20% of adolescents, it takes 6 months or longer to get help. So really, I'm coming at this from what is the cause? How can we look at preventing issues before they come? So cause rather than effect. And so the research will be quite important for that. But really, it's just a fun product that engages children in their own well-being and resilience.
And what a time to come up with it, because it's really bad at the moment. I mean, it couldn't have come at a better time if you tried. Well, Pepita, thank you so much. That's so interesting. I hope everyone else has found it as interesting as I have. I'm going to hand you over to Terry in a minute for questions and answers.
So I've got a few questions. I'm just going to put you as the focus, since the questions are directed at you. So there's quite a lot of psychology used in marketing. And do you think that through your career in marketing, it influenced you choosing to study positive psychology?
That's a very good question, actually. I actually have been interested in psychology. I did it at first year university and loved it. I'm sort of one of those things you look back and think, why didn't I carry on with that rather than labor law, which I did, which psychology would have been a lot more fun. But I think there probably was quite a lot of psychology behind selling, and although it wasn't phrased like that, but really active listening to the customer to find out their needs. And those basic lessons that I learnt on the shop floor were very, very good for selling any product. So yes, I probably did learn quite a lot, although probably didn't realize it at the time.
Picking up psychology by stealth.
Yes, I mean, even some basics like selling to a man, they always used to tell us was different. You know, don't if he asks for some shave gel, put 6 on the counter because he will always bulk buy. And I've never forget the feeling of being so excited when that actually transpired. I was like, wow, he's just bought 6 shave gels. This is amazing.
I can attest to that.
Men always buy bulk. It's amazing.
Did you find your charity work more rewarding than your marketing work?
What a great question. Yes, actually I did. And what I found phenomenal is that the feeling of working with people that you really enjoy. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy working with perfume people, but we were also paid quite well to do that job. And we had a lot of luxury around us. I mean, there were a lot of things that, well, there's a lot of psychology behind that too. You know, we had a lot of extrinsic motivation that in working for cosmetics, you know, free perfume and everything. But with the charity, you're not paid. So, you know, why are you doing it? And it really was the most amazing fulfillment, actually, which I have missed quite a lot. In fact, I went back to do some volunteer reading in the local primary school because I missed a lot of my Daisy Trust work quite a lot. And I used to love the monthly meetings. And when you've got 2 young babies, when it's quite soul destroying sometimes, stacking the dishwasher, you know, to have your friends come around and do a proper meeting and with an agenda and minutes, and it felt very grown up, but also do something that was really worthwhile. And I loved visiting all the charities in Fulham as well. I really enjoyed meeting people. I'm still in touch with Fulham Good Neighbours and Stoll, and lots of wonderful, wonderful charities in Fulham. So yes, have I answered that? I hope I've answered that.
Yes, you have definitely. So do you think, this is another charity sector question, do you think that the charity sector suffers from an uneven playing field in such that you get the big charities such as the Cancer Trust, the Heart Foundation, all those kind of things that people see as kind of really, I want a better term, sexy. So they get all the publicity and a lot more donations. Is that a problem for smaller, less well-known charities?
I'm not sure I could answer that to do justice to everything, because I think there's some large charities that do some phenomenal work, and you know, I can't, you know, name all of them, but something like Royal Marsden. I mean, my husband jumped off a building to raise money for them, and he's never been so terrified in all his life. But I mean, they do phenomenal work. But I think the smaller charities, and at the time I was doing Daisy Trust, David Cameron was talking a lot about big society, and I think that's something that's not talked about as much in the lexicon, which is a shame, because I think there's a lot that people can do that is not necessarily a big charity, not necessarily, but is still so important for communities and societies. I mean, I think of the lollipop lady, you know, every time I see her out here locally, I always smile because I think, wow, you're doing that every day, rain, shine, you know, and you're volunteering for that. So I think that community is really, and in a funny way, I do miss Fulham, because Fulham had the most amazing community, and you know, that I do miss, because funnily enough in the country, it's not quite the same. It's a shame, you know, the high street is going and things like that. It's not a, so yes, so the smaller charity jobs, I suppose what I'm saying is the smaller charity jobs are just as important as some of the bigger ones too.
Yeah. So you've had several career path changes in your life, all of them quite different. What do you think's next on the horizon?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I might have to say that I'll just try and get to grips with this tech product, because there's so much to learn in tech, and you know, it's quite difficult when you don't come from a tech background, but I have learnt a lot. What is next really is what I'd really love to see is well-being put to the front of the agenda for schools, particularly primary schools, when so much of the prevention can occur. And so possibly next, maybe something charitable in that sector. That is my real passion, is how can you get this knowledge, these psychological skills of well-being and resilience to children, but also to families and communities, so that when they're young enough to prevent issues occurring, and obviously you can't solve there are wider systemic issues with poverty and socioeconomic, there's all sorts of other risk factors, but there are a lot of things you can do, particularly in schools, whole school well-being. And the pandemic has shown it's been awful that we've had to go through a pandemic to show, but just what happens when you lack social connection. We've all missed our friends dreadfully, and I think for children particularly, relationships are incredibly important. And maybe at primary, not there's so much focus on academia, which is obviously still important, but relationships and getting on and learning to communicate properly and share and have empathy for your your classmate. All of those skills are so important for later in life. Yes. I don't know if I'm not sure I've answered what my next step is, but you can think what my passion is.
Definitely. So final question, do you work with children's charities to promote your virtual reality app?
Not yet. But of course, the hospital charity that we're working with is, I suppose, in a way that is linked, but we are going to conduct the research first. And in fact, one of our research partners is actually based in Australia, and they are a charity that go into Australian hospitals to deliver positive psychology to sick children. So I suppose, yes, we are working, but with them, we're just starting on the path now. Okay, that's all my questions. So thank you very much for answering those, some quite challenging ones there, which I thought you dealt with quite well. I'm going to hand back to Janie now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. But thank you, Pepita or Peppy or Pep, however you like to be called. I know you as all those names. But thank you for sharing this wonderful story with us. I think it was amazing, and you did so much hard work. Thank you very, very much.